this is us, Bristol Innovators Group. Some of you will know about us, maybe some not. Like I said, it's our first session in a series of them. I'm Rob Sheffield. One of the people you can see, I think, on the gallery view is Hannah Beatrice, also one of the co-founders of the group and one of the organisers. And we're really pleased to have Lee Fairbrother with us here today. Hi there, Lee.
Well, good afternoon.
So I'm going to hand over to Lee just shortly. So let me just tell you a little bit about the network itself. We started back in November 2019 with the intention to connect people across the city of Bristol, UK, who had an interest in the theme of innovation. We always intended it to be a cross-sectoral network, and people have really taken to it. So when I checked this morning, our latest number of members, we've got 1,062, and we run a certain number of learning events. We also run more social events purely for connecting. And sometimes people in the network do real work to make kind of life and work better for people in Bristol. So I guess, we've been running for about 4.5 years and seem to be still growing. This series of events came from an idea between me and a chap called Dom Shepherd Baker. Dom's another member of the group, and we thought, let's try out 5 or 6 sessions through the springtime, and I think through the autumn as well. And we really plan to make it a kind of a rolling program. So we will drop the Eventbrite link in the chat. It's also on the last slide. So if you're seeing this on record, you can have a look at that. Here are the series of events coming up. Lee's up first today, and all of them are going to be recorded. Which of these did not result from investment in NASA's moon landing program all that time ago?
Oh, the computer mouse.
A pretty amazing. I mean, actually, isn't that a pretty amazing list? I'm going to tell you, all but one of them did come from it. Right? It's like they weren't planned, but there was loads of material technology tested out, of course, to get someone on the moon. So only one of them I've made up, right? One of them doesn't belong on the list. Which one do you reckon it is?
I say I'm going for the computer mouse.
Okay. I don't know that I expect you to get this right, Hannah, and Jamie, but what do you think? What do you think, Hannah?
What
This is
didn't come from that? Nike Air trainers?
The short thing is you're all wrong. No, that came from it. Lee popped in CAT scans. The only one that didn't was robotic home cleaners. So pretty amazing, right? And I found that out from this book. Italian economist, works in London, who's written some really interesting stuff about the role of the state and actually how she thinks the role of the state can propel innovation. And she uses the Apollo moon landings as an example of lots of money invested, but lots of spillover innovations came out of it that were just not planned.
Fabulous. Thank you very much for the introduction, Rob. Great to be here. Yeah, I'm Lee Fairbrother. I'm currently head of commercial at Qbot, which is a technology company, and I'll talk about what we do and the innovation that we've developed shortly. I'm also a home retrofit evangelist and a bit of a survivor, having just in the process of completing a very long retrofit on this home. So hopefully you can see my slides. Rob reached out to me late last year after I posted on LinkedIn about my participation in the Green Open Homes weekend in Bath. It was scheduled for November. The work in this house was due to be finished in June. So when I committed earlier in the year, I thought that's no problem. Even if there's an overrun, there's plenty of opportunity. So it was an interesting experience taking part, and we'll come on to more of that. But one of the learnings for that weekend, which has been echoed in conversations with Rob since, is how much people want to decarbonise their homes and their lives, and how there's a bit of a disconnect between what people want to do and their understanding of how to do it. So I'm really passionate about reducing our impact on the environment. I took a career break in 2009, spent a few years overseas working on conservation projects. And when I came back, I wanted it to be more aligned in the work that I did, that the purpose was more aligned to those outcomes. And so I started working on energy related and fuel poverty related projects with social housing providers, local authorities, all over the world, all over the UK rather. And over time, that meant that I got to attend lots of various different trade shows, lots of exhibitions, lots of conferences, which is a fantastic way to absorb and to learn. And on that journey, I came across a company called QBot. And we'll talk more about that as we go through. And you can see on the screen there, there's some little robots. So what I want to cover today, and I want to leave time at the end for questions from the audience, because I'm sure there will be some, is talk a little bit about my personal retrofit journey and the innovations in my home, find out a bit more about where you are on yours, talk a little bit about the Green Open Homes scheme, and then look at the challenges we all face and do a bit of a deep dive into domestic retrofit around QBot as an innovation as technology, the other innovative measures that I've used in my home, and then share some of the learnings and takeaways. So lots and lots to cover. I could speak about any of those topics for a long amount of time. So I will crack on. Around us, we're surrounded by buildings, and they make up as much as 40% of our carbon output. And 80% of the buildings that are around us today will still be here in 2050 when we are targeting achieving carbon net zero. Now, the definition of that is a topic for another discussion. But what that means is that unless you have already, and even if you have, every one of us is going to encounter retrofitting of energy efficiency measures in some way, shape, or form. That might be something that happens late in that process, or it might be something you're interested in driving forward right now. So with that in mind, there's a barcode, QR code there, and a link with a code for a little Slido poll. So it'd be really interesting to understand just where you personally are on your own retrofit journey. How has retrofitting touched your life so far? Is it something that you are in the process of, something that you feel you're accomplished at, or something that you're thinking of but maybe don't know where to start? So if you want to submit your responses there, that should be live, and then I should be able to share those results as they come in.
I've just dropped the link into chat as well, or
Perfect.
if you want to click through.
Brilliant, that's fantastic. So I'll just keep an eye on that as people click. But we started the journey here in this home back in 2019. We moved to Bath to be closer to family. We decided that we wanted to stay, and we looked to find somewhere to live, and we've ended here in this grade 2 listed, what's considered third-rate Georgian property. It's the Barratt home of the Georgian world. It's a mid-terrace, and it has therefore got a heritage to it. It's 210 years old. And we started a process in 2019 to go through listed building consent, planning permission, and to understand how we can overcome many of the historical damp, moisture issues, some of the structural issues, and try and tackle that. And it has been a long process. Okay, so from the votes on Slido, it looks like everybody is planning on improving the energy efficiency of their home, but don't know yet where to start, which is really good to know and not uncommon, and one of the themes that came out from that weekend. So I'll share what I know and have acquired, and thankfully it's potentially a lot easier to start that process now than it was in 2019 when I did it, and certainly easier than before that. So a little bit about Green Open Homes in Baines. So this was an idea that started over a decade ago, and events were run pre-pandemic where visitors could come and go and see how energy efficiency measures had been applied in people's homes in the city. And they've been working in collaboration with Transition Bath Bath and North East Somerset Council, Bath Preservation Trust, and this time with Bath and West Community Energy Fund. And with another hat on, I'm a trustee on the Bath and West Community Energy Fund board. This year, because I was so involved, I thought it would only be right with the work that I was doing that I put my home forward to share my experience. And I was one of the 17 homes that were open to the public and had nearly 50 visitors over the 2 days, which was an undertaking in itself and required a little bit of imagination, because there were elements I had to say, where you can view this bit of tarpaulin, just imagine there's some glazing here. So this bit of glazing particularly was a tarpaulin when everybody visited the house. So it definitely showed the process live and helped people understand. Now, what's interesting about Green Open Homes event is it's not isolated to just Bath or last year. There was also an event at Chew Magna. And for any of those of you interested, there's contact details within this presentation. The slides can be shared afterwards, where you can set up or be involved in these events locally. And one of the key reasons I wanted to do that, not only being passionate about retrofit, but was because of a simple stat. And of the 700 people that attended the earlier Open Homes event, over 70% of them went on to retrofit measures in their own homes. So if we are going to make a change, if we're going to move the needle and we are really going to help to decarbonize, then actually these type of events, peer-to-peer, sharing knowledge and experience, are critical to getting people's take up, because as you've identified yourself in the poll, many people just don't know where to start. So more information available there, and some of the stakeholders there. So what are the challenges? Well, this is a cross-section of your average late Victorian terrace home. There are millions of these in the UK. Although my home is older than this, it's not dissimilar. These properties were built at a time when quite often there was no electricity, there was no internal plumbing in some, and maybe not this age. And they were built when the primary heating source was an open fireplace. Now that required the input of air to fuel those fires and to quickly exhaust those fumes out of the chimneys. So we face all sorts of challenges with properties like this and newer ones. If you have a suspended timber floor, and we'll look at that in great depth in a moment, then that's a source of uncontrolled air infiltration, of heat loss, of damp and cold, moist air moving around. If you've got solid walls, then they can conduct and lose heat through radiation. And there's solutions, insulation internally, externally, and in the cavity that can be used, but all take considerations and need to be properly designed. Our roofs and our lofts, they all lose heat as heat travels upwards, and there's different solutions that can be considered there. There's a moisture risk with everything that we do. Each of us produces moisture every day, not just through the processes of cooking and cleaning, but we expel moisture. The more people live in a home, the more moisture is expelled. And building regulations and standards are static. They say within a house like this, I should have a mechanical extract fans in wet rooms, and I should have background ventilation in habitable rooms. But I could put 10 people in this house, and that would create damp and mold issues. I could have 2, 3 people in this house, and we don't have damp and mold issues. So it really has to be considered as part of the profile. And then uncontrolled air infiltration. Doesn't sound very exciting. Drafts, as most of us know them. Buildings, the older they are, definitely drafty. We did try to design out draftiness in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but we didn't necessarily combine that with adequate ventilation, and we created other problems. But it's amazing how much heat loss and how much difference uncontrolled air infiltration makes. And by not tackling that, you'll have continual problems. So all of these challenges are faced to a varying degree on all kind of property types. We all have walls, roofs, floors, windows, doors, and there's increasing number of innovative measures that can be implemented to reduce energy consumption and improve performance. I'll focus on the ones I'm most familiar with, and then I can take questions on others at the end as well. So, uninsulated suspended timber floors. About 1 in 3 homes, 1 in 4 homes in the UK constructed like this. Certainly pretty much all domestic properties in urban areas pre-1950 and 1960. We lose about 20% of our heat loss through the floor, and they're responsible for about a third of those uncontrolled air infiltration and draft. The traditional methods, because these void depths underneath the floor are very small, involves taking everything out of the house in order to tear up the floor to put insulation down, which is incredibly intrusive, therefore expensive and time consuming and very messy. Because of that, there isn't very much opportunity in a property's lifetime to do it. If you're doing a massive renovation project, you might be gutting a whole house, then there might be an opportunity. But certainly where we work with social housing landlords, or just generally when you move into a property, there's never a good time to tear up your whole floor. So we estimate from the 10,000 or so surveys that we've done that this has been implemented in probably less than 1%. And the traditional methods, which involve using mineral walls or cut board, don't create an airtight seal, and therefore you don't get fantastic performance from them. So you go to a huge amount of effort, use a huge amount of cash or expenditure to get a not particularly well-performing result. And that prevents it happening frequently. Our founders at QBot came up with the idea of being able to use a robot to insulate the floor by dropping that into the floor void and using that to remotely deploy insulation. Now, I've got that a little video to share with you as to what that looks like. It takes about 1 to 2 days in general. And what we can see here is some of that process. And I'll go through that quickly. So really important to do a technical survey and establish how the condition of the floor and therefore take important readings around ventilation, around moisture content. All of that's captured digitally on our platform, and that can therefore be used to generate the type of documentation we need to provide for accreditation purposes. Now, interestingly, because we work in the funded space with social housing providers and local government, we have to meet the highest accreditation and compliance requirements, which is something called PAS 2035, which most homeowners will never have heard of because it doesn't impact them. But it's a much higher standard than anything that is currently enforced in the domestic setting. So we're checking those conditions to ensure that the floor is in good house, it's adequately ventilated, that the timbers are in good condition. And if a floor is properly ventilated, as designed, and there is no local water ingress, those moisture readings will be below 20%, and it is safe and practical then to insulate it. So we'll capture that information, and if that property is suitable for an install, then we can deploy an installation team. Now, that team is usually 2 operators. They'll set up outside the property with their installation rig. And this has happened many times in Bristol and the surrounding area because we're working with Bristol City Leap, formerly Bristol City Council, on funded schemes in the region. We have an operations base in Newport, which allows us to deploy this all across the southwest. And we have accredited install partners around the country and in Europe that also are trained and accredited to deliver this as well. So we'll arrive at a property, we'll create access points in the floor, the robot will be inserted, and then it will be able to install the insulation from the underside. And I think it's easiest to show what that looks like and talk through the process. So we're currently on our 7th generation of robot. This is 10 years in development. This is a Mark 7 low void. And what you can see there is the operator eye view. That's the targeting system, aligning the spray pattern to the floor joists. And initially we put on a very thin flash layer. This is effectively acting as a seal. This will fill any gaps and prevent excess foam expanding above. If there are large gaps in floorboards, they'll be covered or taped to prevent that going through. But what we then do is start to build up in layers. And we're aiming to achieve about 125 mil of insulation. That will encase the floor joists, because they're typically 100 mil deep, and remove thermal bridging. Now, if the floor joists are deeper, we can apply insulation to a different depth, depending on the design and the required outcome. But this is your kind of best cost-effective kind of use of material and performance. And what you get from this is an increased air tightness, increased thermal performance, which leads to an improvement on your SAP score, which is the number behind your energy performance certificate or EPC. anywhere between 2 and 12 points. Importantly, if you're in the home afterwards, then you'll find that you don't have the drafts, that you don't have cold feet, and that the distribution of temperature is much more even. So the operator can use this. There's some automations within the robot around the targeting system and the application process, which helps to speed it up. And the robot quality assurance processes records all of this information, which can then be independently checked and verified later. The robots are incredibly powerful because behind them they have a tether for power and data, and also the hose pipe which is connected to the vehicle, which is delivering the material. And when it spins around in a moment, what you'll see is the spray assembly at the front. The insulation is mixed on the robot and launched from this spray assembly as a mist, and then it solidifies when it hits the substrate. That means that a skilled operator using the targeting system is able to navigate a whole range of obstacles like pipe work, electrical cables, and gas pipe work. Also able to move between different spaces. You can see this is a test cell in one of our facilities, and therefore can apply the insulation past any potential barriers, and so that it can expand into space behind, creating a continuous layer of insulation. For those of you interested in the technical side, we can share more information, but the resultant U value of installing in this method is about between 0.17 and about 0.22. So well ahead of the minimum requirements of the building regulations and performing much better than any other material that's currently available. The current material we're using is a polyurethane closed cell foam. And that's why it's so important that the technical survey picks up moisture content, because we are now creating effectively a waterproof layer, protecting that floor from taking on additional moisture risk from below. Because if you think about the homes we live in the UK, we're built on, we have a lot of rainfall that seeps through into the ground underneath our properties and then could potentially, obviously, rise up into them. So what's the result? Well, you can see here, this is a similar cross-section to earlier. We've created this insulated area underneath the external side of the ground floor. That brings that floor structure within the insulated envelope. That cross ventilation remains underneath from the existing air bricks, and that's an important component. Never have insulation without ventilation. And that will then create this hydrophobic seal. So we've now stopped the flow of cold, moist air coming into the property. Now, in properties where that is not the case, cold, moist air can hit surfaces inside and condense, and that can create damp and mold. So by reducing the amount of moisture coming in from the outside environment, we're reducing the risk of damp and mold. And as an average, this saves homeowners between about 16 to 24% on their energy bills. But more importantly, from a carbon perspective, that on average equates to about 650 kilos of CO2 per year. Now, there is obviously embedded CO2 in the material and in the process and in the development of robots. And we've calculated the embedded CO2 in your average install to be about 800 kilos. That's all of the components of the robot, the application process, the fuel to get to site, the material itself. So within 2 years for your average property, it will become carbon neutral. And the expected life of this product is about 42 years. That's based on the fact that it was invented in the late 70s, the insulation material itself. But we know that it will go on for a lot longer because it is only degraded by ultraviolet light, which it doesn't come into contact with. So as a minimum, insulating a home like this is expected to save about 25 to 35 tons of CO2 over its lifetime, with the potential to save a lot more. And in energy savings, that probably looks at about £11,000 with no energy inflation, and significantly more if you factor in energy inflation moving forward. Especially when you consider that the majority of homes in the UK are heated using gas, or gas central heating systems currently. Now, the price distribution of energy in the UK and cost distribution is unfavorable. So we burn gas, which creates which is a fossil fuel creating CO2, but the levies and the taxes for green measures are put onto an electricity supply because more people have electricity than have gas. So proportionally, we all pay more for electricity. If that was reflective of the actual amount of embedded carbon, gas would be much more expensive. And governments have indicated that they will normalise that in coming years. And we will see the price of gas continue to increase. So that will obviously encourage people to change heating sources and use air source heat pumps and other methods. But with over 20 million gas central heating systems in the UK, that's going to be a major task and something that will therefore impact us. So the energy inflation we can expect to see around gas will be significant. And we need to bear that in mind with the decisions that we start to make. You can visit our website. There's some interactive bots on there that you can ask questions and get answers and understand. One of the interesting things with Bristol especially is 50% of the housing stock within Bristol was built pre-1919. So having suspended timber floors as standards in those urban environments. And we've installed an awful lot of properties there, both through funded schemes working with the local government, but also as independent homeowners as well. Right. That was QBot. That was an innovation, as I say, 10 years so far in the making, now being deployed in thousands of homes in the UK and abroad, something I'm very familiar with on a day-to-day. And now this is a little bit more about my home and the innovations here, because obviously we can deploy multiple measures. So had I known now, or had I known in 2019 what I know now, I would have gone out to the market and found somebody to do a retrofit assessment or equivalent on my home. And that would have created what's called a medium-term energy plan, which basically says to take your home from its current position to net zero over the next 30 years, these are all the things that you can do. From that suite of potential measures, I can then pick and choose the ones most applicable to me, to my building, and to my budget. And the idea is that that's a roadmap for the next 30 years. Now, that didn't exist in its current format in 2019. So the approach I took, me and my partner and I took, was slightly different in that we used the knowledge I had from the sector, we engaged with a local architect, and we also had the limitations of being in a listed building to be able to put forward potential solutions. So it would be fantastic to have solar PV on our roof, but because it's a listed building, we couldn't have anything that was visible from the street level. So we were restricted to an internal valley between two roofs, as you can see here, and therefore there wasn't enough space and there was too much shading to use solar PV. So we decided to install solar thermal collectors. These used to be much more popular, less so now, just because everybody kind of gets and understands solar PV. But these sit in the valley and they capture heat from the sun. They're predominantly sort of southwest facing, and they convert that using a refrigerant and heat exchange it into the property into a smart hot water tank. So this is very much like the processes described in an air source heat pump or even in your fridge, taking the temperature differential and using that to your advantage. So this was an image I got out on the roof for the first time this year in last week when I was doing some filming with the Open Green Homes team who were doing a case study. It was 17 degrees outside. So not a very warm day. Probably the warmest day of the year so far, but certainly not a warm day. But on that black box, which is the heat exchanger, it was showing anything up to 35 degrees temperature coming off the roof. So all of that heat being exchanged for free and putting that heat into our smart hot water tank. So you can see the graph there from that day where that the levels of hot water were increasing. It's a fantastic piece of technology. This is from a company called Mixergy. Mixergy have revolutionized the way that we use hot water tanks. Traditional hot water tanks, if you think about them, they're just basically giant kettles. There's a heating element at the bottom, and that heats the water, and then we use it. Now, obviously, if you exhaust and empty your hot water tank, it takes ages to heat up because you're heating it up from the bottom, a huge body of water. The smart technology in Mixergy turns that around. Hot water stratifies. So if you pump in hot water at the top, you create an increasing layer of hot water sitting on cold water. and then you extract from that. So you don't need to heat the whole tank. You can just use the amount that you need. And the smart learning technology, the artificial intelligence, or sorry, machine learning in the system and in the app looks at our usage every day, works out what we're going to need, and only heats that amount. You can control it manually if you need more, and obviously it gets topped up free of charge from the solar gain, which sort of from March through to September is going to probably provide the vast majority of all of our hot water costs. So that means, combined with internal things like changing to an induction hob, that the only gas that we need is for our gas central heating, because I couldn't get an air source heat pump through planning permission at the time, but I've future-proofed the heating system so that that can be replaced later. So we don't need to use any gas during those from sort of end of March onwards. When we're not heating, all of that water can be heated either through the solar or through electricity. So we're kind of not using anything during that period, which obviously significantly reduces our carbon output. It also means at the drop of the hat, you can boost up as much hot water as you want and have as many baths or as many guests as you need, which means gives you flexibility that you just don't have on normal systems. The other systems that we used here may not be necessarily as considered immediate innovations, because they don't necessarily have computer components to them, but actually it's really important to use innovative technologies, or the right technologies, for the design of the building. So this is a solid stone property. The walls at the front and the back of the house, the main elevations, are about 450 to 600 mil thick. Now, if you looked at a typical energy performance certificate, it would say you've got solid walls, therefore you should insulate them. But actually our walls are so thick that they are by no means the most important thing that we need to do. However, there are walls in the property, and behind me, in fact, that were only a single leaf of stone, 150 mil. And that was effectively like a huge heat sink, sucking out heat from the rest of the building. Because it's solid stone, single leaf, it needs to breathe. Otherwise you've potentially trap moisture. And a lot of the work we did here was to separate the house from the moisture problems that it was having. So design a system which isolated it. Because if you've got a damp house, it will be cold for extended periods. That will cause damage, and you almost can't fight that with a heating system. Or if you do, it's not going to be running efficiently because you're heating so hard. So we use this wood fiber system from Lime Green. It's called Warm Shell, and it's a combination of lime and wood fiber and meshing. And we've insulated the backsides of this house on these 2 floors and above here, and it has made a massive difference. What you can see here is a couple of the graphs from the smart controls that we've also employed to help us control that heating system. And in this space where we've put this in the kitchen utility as an example, which used to be the coldest space in the house. You couldn't really use it during the winter. You would close the door, you would have drafts coming through there, but it was absolutely freezing. Now it maintains steady sort of 18 to 20 degrees temperature with no heating, just because it can retain the heat so much better, and it works in conjunction with the rest of the house in equilibrium. You've got solar gain at the front. The Georgians were very good. Big windows, south facing, lots of solar gain, heating up that mass of stone, dissipating that through the day, much more even temperature distribution. So working with that. Also what we did is then, which wouldn't necessarily be considered energy efficiency, but we put additional heating sources in there, but not additional radiators or anything like that. We live in a house where we prepare all of our most of our own food. So we put an oven in there, which we use regularly. And that extra bit of heat once a day or twice a day just helps to boost that temperature in there and maintain a more even temperature for that whole floor. And we can see that again on the graph on the right on March 14th, much more even temperature distribution, losing less than a degree over the whole 24-hour period with basically no heating, which is obviously what you're trying to achieve. We have lots of homes really leaky here. You want to try and retain as much of that heat as possible. So that's made much of the house more habitable, and a combination of electric underfloor heating and using Hive to control those systems smartly. But just for those, just to show that it's not all straightforward, these are some of the images of what a deep retrofit can look like. Tearing out floors. The image second from the right there is building the new steel frame, which is the frame above my head now. That's the hole the pit that I'm talking to you from. To separate the house from the garden and all of the moisture that runs down the allotments and down the hill previously into the back of our house. Where you can also see at the very end there is what happens when you dig a hole and find that you've got no foundations underneath the back of your building, and you're going to need some underpinning. So deep retrofit on this scale is certainly not for the faint-hearted. It's a decision to make. Internal wall insulation is intrusive, which is why innovative measures like those developed at QBot, which can be done in a day or two with a minimum disruption, are so popular, because it gives people an entry into the system, into taking action in something really meaningful. Now, to the point earlier, how do you get into this? Where do you start? Well, what I've listed here is a bunch of organizations in the Southwest that are working to solve this and help people. So Bath and West Community Energy Fund have an own home energy service. Green Open Homes by Baines and BWCE have a load of information and are looking at setting up 10 more open home events in the Southwest. So if you would like something in areas local to you, in Weston-super-Mare, or perhaps even in Bristol, then there's definitely opportunity there. Green Heritage Homes are working on advice for energy efficiency in homes just like this. How do you achieve energy efficiency? Because many people who came to visit this home sort of said, it's listed. That means we can't do anything, right? And that's not the case. I mean, even here, I wasn't able at the time to get double glazing. But if I was to reapply now, then potentially I could. There's ultra-thin insulation glazing panels that could be used. Fortunately, new tools and new services exist. So Retrofit West, run by WECA, the West of England Combined Authority. You can visit their website. They even have vouchers of up to £250 to help you get assessments through different services. And there's about a dozen different services in the region that can help you do thermal imaging on your home to see where it's losing heat, or look at kind of versions of a retrofit assessment. And then you've got Futureproof operating in Bristol with a similar systems, and Bristol City Leap, a combination of Bristol Council and Amoresco, who are distributing funding from government on the Home Upgrade Grant Scheme. So loads of resources there that you can reach out to start your own journey. And then some links as well about some of the technologies that we've used here through Ventrola, which is the draft exclusion system for Windows, and a shout out to Share and Repair, who have a bath store who I used a thermal camera from this weekend to take some images of the house now we're finished. And the other one on there, although very local to here, is Redwoods. That's the builders that we've used, and I have to say they've been a pleasure, even though we've pushed them well outside of their comfort zone with the requirements of what we've asked them to do. So, next steps and final thoughts. Everything we need to achieve net zero exists today. There will be, and there are, new technologies and solutions being developed all the time, but don't be distracted. That shouldn't be a reason for not taking action, just because something new might come along. There's still the approach to how you insulate your home, to addressing the fabric, to reducing drafts. They are universal. If you've got cold air coming in and out of your house when you don't want it to, doesn't matter what technologies exist in the future, that will still be a problem. You need to address it. Knowing where to start is the challenge, which is why services like ourselves and those that I've outlined exist to help you with that. And also, don't be reluctant to invest in qualified advice. If you had a pension, you would trust a qualified finance advisor. They would have a fee, whether it's embedded in a product or directly. Going to a local builder and saying, oh, what do you think I should do? They will tell you whatever they know how to do. And if it's something new and innovative, they won't necessarily suggest that. They also might not know the best solution for your home. So don't be afraid to invest a little bit, because it is an investment on future savings in your home, future carbon savings, and ensure you get the right solution. And please, don't insulate without ventilating. We do work all over the country, and people are often taken aback when we say, right, we can do this, but we need to put some ventilation in your home as well. And that's because most of us haven't invested historically in our building stock for years. So when I bought this house and moved in, there was literally no ventilation. It was drafty, but that didn't stop the buildup of damp and moisture. There was no mechanical ventilation in kitchen or in bathroom. So that meant when you were cooking or taking a shower, you just had all this buildup of moisture, and that gets through the house and causes problems. It can be controlled actively and used to your advantage. There's even, for more deep retrofits, mechanical heat recovery systems, which will take the heat out of that and the moisture out of it and recycle it. Damp, condensation, mold are a growing concern. If you find it or you suspect it, it needs investigation. The answer is not tanking. The answer is doing a forensic pathological investigation, finding out what the reason is. Could be pointing. It could be a bit of guttering. It could be a whole number of things that need to be fixed rather than just trying to deal with a symptom and paint over it. Everyone wants to know how to deal with damp. That was the other thing I got asked all the time. Ask the question, but don't necessarily go to a tanking company, because they will, like a hammer, have one answer, and that will be tank it. And importantly, if your home is comfortable and well designed, then it will cost less to heat, to run. It will be more comfortable. You'll be able to use more of it, and it will reduce the use of CO2. And even then, if it gets to the extremes where it's difficult to heat your home, if it's well insulated, it will lose less heat. It will retain that heat for longer, and it will therefore help you to maintain that level of comfort without the cost. So loads covered there, loads to talk about, and I'm more than happy to take any questions from anybody in the audience about the different measures, what we've done here, and about Qbot and the technology and the innovation and how we brought that to market over the last decade.
That's great, Lee. Thank you so much. It's really compelling. Folks, I've got a couple of questions as well, but I think we're gonna open it to you. So please unmute. Maybe there's some stuff coming through on chat as well, Lee. I see some questions in there already, but also if you would like to just unmute and ask ahead. There you go, Michael.
Can I go purely because I've got a window of silence from my ill children? So this, Lee, that was absolutely fantastic. Really fascinating. I really enjoyed the way you bridged the kind of, the business that you're part of that's doing, like, tackling it on a big scale, but also the self-initiated stuff. And I think often taking that first step is the hardest. So you are a shining beacon to us all. So thank you very much. I found that really, really insightful. I'm interested in Qbot and where you are now as a company and what the other applications for this kind of technology are. Like, is it just a case of going, we've got something fantastic, let's get it into as many homes as possible? Or are there other ways of applying the same either kind of technology or mentality towards problem solving with sustainability and CO2 reduction that you're working on, that you think, there's white space to move into? What does that kind of future for Qbot look like?
Great question, Michael. And yeah, thanks for asking. So yeah, what we do with our underfloor insulation robot is incredibly niche and specific, and the robots have been developed with that in mind. But we are a technology company with a very strong R&D DNA, and we have basically worked with BEIS and Innovate UK and DEC and now DESNZ over the years to develop other IP as well. So whereas this is our most commercialized product, we've actually developed a couple of other technologies alongside it. So we have a machine learning algorithm which helps to identify properties that might have suspended timber floors and can benefit from this. Also, we have developed an install management and quality assurance platform, and there's real scope with that in the direction of travel within the market to allow the quality assurance process that we've developed to be applicable to other measures. There's also other robots that have been developed or in development which might get commercialized in the future, some of which I can talk about, some of which less so. So there's an enormous amount of activity in the prop tech space, and this technology could be used in adjacent markets to apply other materials as well, and we've looked at a few of those, but also that whole how we package up the solution and we help individuals like yourselves, myself, to get to a better energy performance is very much in what we're developing. So yes, there's lots of space. Is it white space? No, there's lots of competition out there. We're not the only people to have recognized that there are services wanted and needed. And so it's kind of working in collaboration with others to get to some of those solutions.
Lee, I have a question.
Go ahead.
We'll come to what's in the chat in a moment, because both Hannah and Jamie have asked some stuff as well. Look, just a quick question about the process of what did you call it? The green open home.
Open homes. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, right? To be able to organize, I imagine, with multiple parties across a geography, to have access to homes where people are already doing this. And you said that with 70% of the people who came along, it led to action. But politically, how do you do it? I mean, if we wanted to do it in Bristol, and that kind of organizing across a space must take a bit of coordination. So who needs to be involved?
Well, it does, and I can speak to my limited experience of it, but certainly point you in the direction of those more expertise, not least Sarah Grimes at Bath and West Community Energy. So yeah, there needs to be a kind of an acceptance and a desire and recognition from the local authority, because their support is fundamental, and we have that here, and you certainly have that, I think, in Bristol. I've been part of Future Leap and various different networks over there, so I know the city wants to push towards that. So I doubt there would be much resistance. There would be a lot of coordination. Obviously, there needs to be some funding to do that, and coordinating that. But I think everybody sees the value of it. So yeah, and then the volunteers will come forward. Obviously, we have networks here, of which I'm part, which raised its awareness to me, and you at Bristol especially have even more networks around wanting similar outcomes. So I think there's definitely opportunity for collaboration, and I would recommend reaching out, and I can share more contacts to do that. But yeah, it's definitely a collaborative effort from those passionate about achieving more.
Yeah. There's a few questions in chat. Jamie, do you want to chip in and ask yours around rental? If not, I'll summarize.
Yeah, hi. Really good presentation, really innovative. I love the video. That was very cool. But yeah, just generally, a lot of the stories you hear in the news are around black mold within rental spaces and general poorer communities. How do you actually get landlords to come to the table on a larger scale? Because obviously we've had the idea of EPC ratings within houses, and the idea was that we'd get every house up to a C and you couldn't rent beyond a certain point. I think it was, if it was going to be a C, then that's got pushed back. And yes, you've got a lot of people come around to see your house, but I'm going to guess a lot of them aren't landlords. They're in their own home, and they are often doing it for their own benefit. Landlords obviously very much in it for the money, make as much money as possible, and do it as cheap as possible when they're renting out their property. So how would you go about engaging landlords in a way that is actually going to make a conscious effort across a larger space?
Yeah, I completely understand the scenario you're describing there. Yeah, you're right. The vast majority of people that came to visit this house were people that lived in similar houses or in a similar circumstance. And there was a great variety across the 17 homes of different build age, build type, listed, not listed, and people gravitated towards those. From a private rental sector, it is challenging. In the social housing sector, they need to achieve EPC by 2030, and all are on that in some shape or form. And there is funding to support it. MEES, which is the minimum energy efficiency standards, which applies to private rental sector, currently sit at EPC-E. And you're right, the government recently reined back on EPC-C as the same target. But I think if we get a new government, and there's strong signals that we will, that is certainly something that will be under review. There is funding under certain schemes, under certain circumstances available to landlords if they can evidence that they have already invested a minimum amount on energy efficiency, or that they can't invest on it. So things like the Home Upgrade Grant Scheme and some elements of ECO, the Energy Company Obligation, do allow for tenants and residents to be able to push their landlord towards action, but there has to be a willingness from the landlord as well. What we see from a broader perspective within social housing is that there's a recognition that if you don't fix these problems, then the Human Habitation Act, Awaab's law, which is getting an improvement in timelines, and other measures and legislation in place, means that the cost of inaction is going to outweigh the cost of action. Equally, from a maintenance perspective, the longer that you leave these things, then the more it will cost them. So there is a kind of cost benefit and analysis piece to present to a landlord, but you've got to be able to get them to actively engage. I would expect MEES will change in the next 12 to 15 months. I hope MEES will change, and that will then drive a huge amount of activity, because you're right, people won't be able to rent their homes if they're not meeting those minimum standards. So yes, I share your pain. No immediate action, I don't think, but unless you have a relationship with a landlord that you can engage and say, look, this is what potentially it costs. This is potentially the funding that's available. That funding won't be there forever. So if you don't do it, then the cost in the future is almost definitely going to be more.
Thanks, Lee. And thanks, Jamie and Michael, for the questions as well. Handed to the some in chat, Lee. We're going to share some clips of this on social media. If you're watching the videoed version up on YouTube, please drop a comment in, give your response, any your reflections, anything you want to know more about. But Lee, mainly I want to thank you for taking the time to share your experiences with us and giving a really compelling presentation. Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Okay. Thank you all. Bye-bye.